Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to some of you to our Finextra webinar today, Operational Resilience, Harnessing AI and ML and Automation. I'm Scott Hamilton, moderator and contributor to Finextra. And I am here with a very esteemed panel today, Greg Bukowski, Strategic CTO of BMC Software, our sponsor, Prasoon Mukherjee, VP Unit Head of Data and Customer Experience, Societe Generale Global Solutions Center, Carmen Podgorski, Cross-Border Payments for Bank of New York Mellon, and Craig Borisovich, Director, Enterprise Architecture Payments of Payments Canada. I'm going to give you a quick overview here, and then we'll get into our session. First of all, we've talked a ton here at Finextra and throughout the financial world about digital transformation and what is it accomplished to improve banking speed and execution in only a few years, only a couple of years, that likely would have taken many more if COVID hadn't struck the world in 2019-20. You had many customers, many financial institution employees forced out of office right up to the present times. There simply was no way, with branches closed, staff at home, both for banks and for their companies, their customers, to have access to traditional tools and methods were limited or almost unavailable. So now all customers in retail, corporate, and investment banking, securities, they've seen what digital interactions with their financial institutions look like, and they like it. They expect fast, frictionless, or reduced friction transactions, uninterrupted access to accounts, services, and balances 24/7, safe and secure processing of everything they do. They want an FI that can get it all done, coast to coast, country to country, worldwide. And they also want outstanding and intuitive user experiences. And on top of all that, they probably want it cheaper too, and cheaper than it's ever been. So these are tall orders all around. And then there's operational resilience. Financial institutions strive for it, despite often struggling with legacy systems or remnants of the same that just weren't built to move so fast and scope so widely between all that disparate data and the data sources and the people who have to actually run them or update them if they can. And potential outages, staff shortages, external threats of many kinds lurk more now than ever before. So system resilience, regulators require it. No matter what happens, banks must be held to the highest standards of operational integrity and have tremendous fault tolerance, cybersecurity, and fraud protections and backup systems in place to ensure unlimited operation. No matter what happens in the world, what threats from external sources try to target them for ill-gotten gains, or maybe just to create mayhem for them and their customers. It's all become incredibly interconnected in this financial world. So where does automation of financial institutions' operational backbone systems really make sense? And not just for banks, but for fintechs, for fintech partners as well. Where can artificial intelligence and machine learning tools fill in the blanks? When people and present systems can't move fast enough or access data widely enough to inform decisions or respond to system failures or diagnose threats to their operational resilience. Where's the silver lining in the cloud hanging over the financial industry? Or is it really that the cloud is the silver lining? Or is it just part of the answer? Well, these and some other innovation and automation opportunities are what we're going to talk about, where the financial industry is going, and we're going to talk about today with our esteemed panel of industry experts. So let's jump right into it. But before we do, I want to give you a couple quick housekeeping announcements. We'll have 2 audience polls, so stay tuned for those. We also welcome your questions, and we'll get to them, as many of them as we can as we go along. And then again, the session will be recorded. And also 2 reference docs are included in your sign-up sheet there that you'll see on your screen. Yeah, visibility is critical in managing visibility is critical in managing a resilient modern banking infrastructure, and then also 5 factors to consider when building operational resilience. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to introduce, first of all, or I'm going to hand it over to Greg Bukowski. And Greg, I want you to talk about identification and mapping. What are some of the reasons why there's such a challenge now for financial institutions and others trying to build that operational resilience? You shared with me that systems and practices have really changed at a much more rapid pace. We've talked about it here. We also know that it has forced traditional financial institutions to move much faster than they normally did, more nimbly. Regulations are changing. Can you outline some of the factors and the tools involved in that process?
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for attending this webinar. Yeah, so I'm from BMC Software, as Scott said. My name is Greg Bukowski. I'm a CTO that supports our field in the marketplace, support all of our North American strategic customers at BMC Software, where we have 10 out of 10 top banks, 9 out of 10 top insurers. So when Scott asked about identification and mapping, that's a critical area of what we do from what we support our customers at, from mainframe to the cloud. And as customers have adopted new technologies and as the IT landscape has changed and transformed over time, over the decades that we've been supporting our customers, their approach and how they have to handle that has changed drastically changed within the space, right? I mean, when you used to look at how workload was measured and identified and services that were running on the mainframe, identifying those same services in an ephemeral world in the cloud is extremely different, right? And so when we support our customers, it's from a standpoint of identifying those applications and those services that support it from an infrastructure standpoint, the applications and software that run on top of that, and then most importantly, tying that back to the business services that they support, right? And so that's where BMC is investing a lot of our AI and ML, and where we see the industry going too, right? I mean, that's ultimately when you're measuring operational resiliency, it's taking it back into those auditors and being able to report back for your line of business, for your organization to say, given the technology stacks that support us, given the operational processes that we have, how do we support that, right? And it begins with identifying and mapping the key components of that stack back to support your line of business. And so as those things change, right, where it used to be maybe you could identify those, you can map those from almost a manual standpoint, that's impossible in today's world, right? So you have to lean into automation like you talked about. So one key component of that is identifying through an automated mechanism, being able to consume all the data and all the change that's happening in your environment, being able to bring together a real-time map to provide the visibility back to the line of business to support them as far as what operational and what technology stacks support their businesses and processes.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that very good introduction. And Carmen, on a similar front, tell us about your experience working for major financial institutions. What are some examples you can share related to this process of identification and mapping? And of the factors Greg mentioned, any really stand out in your mind for financial institutions to address?
Sure, thank you, Scott. So Bank of New York Mellon is a major provider in both the securities rights space, securities services, custody, right, settlement, where the complexity of data, right, around all the right holdings we have in our mutual funds, in our retirement funds, right, in our investments, coupled with the treasury services aspects of the business, right, where you settle and clear payments in more than 120 currencies, means the complexity is immense. So from a payments perspective, for example, complexity comes from a few angles. We are dealing with different payment types, right? You have from wires to ACH, to real-time payments, to card payments, digital wallets, right? Digital cash, moving into, right, the multi-currencies and cryptocurrencies that are existing and kind of like seem to mushroom almost every quarter. So you have different payment types. All of these payment types, have to be routed, right? They have a beneficiary account behind it, which can be held in various currencies, in various cryptos. Routing mechanism, right, to reach that particular beneficiary. Corridors, right? Different countries coming with their own requirements. Regulators, which are assigning to a particular corridor and to a particular currency, let's say a purpose of payment, right, when you send it, versus others, right, that perhaps are not looking for that type of information. So you have so many complex requirements that are driven by the multitude of payment types that we currently have, that unless you deploy automation, you deploy machine learning, you deploy newer technologies and integrations around APIs, right? Given that we are dealing with legacy platform, legacy systems, then very easily you could get yourself in a situation where you have, a booming operations team that has to deal with manual processes that, drives increased costs, right, for the bank. So the good news is that we have the emerging, right, and existing technologies that are helping us deal with this increased complexity in the treasury space, be that coming from automation, machine learning, right, artificial intelligence, the API integrations, right, of our existing and newer platforms. The cloud, right, where we can actually house some of our major processors, and on top of which, right, we can easily add other technologies, other layers, right, that are helping and enable the processing. We have obviously the open banking that's starting to creep more from the retail space into the small business and the corporate space, which is good news for our customers, right? Because we'll bring that integration real time of all their, treasury processes and give them the chance to take advantage and streamline, right, their treasury processes. So lots of changes in the technology space, from data lakes to the cloud, to the automation, to the APIs that I'm mentioning, that we are betting and investing in to help us deal with the complexity of all the business that we need, right, to support for our customers in so many jurisdictions, across so many asset types, and in so many currencies. So it's exciting developments and exciting technologies that we are deploying. And working in this environment and ecosystem with both our technology providers, with fintechs, right, to integrate various rails, as well as with regulators, right, to see if we could develop together more efficient rails, more efficient types of payments to continue to enable our clients' treasury processes.
Thanks, Carmen. That's not complex at all. I mean, it's quite a tall order to do everything that you must do. And maybe as we shift to Prasoon, who's in a slightly different business with Societe Generale, we've got some interesting thoughts on this topic, Prasoon, regarding systems ID and mapping, and also the order of priority that financial institutions should take when they're making decisions on when and where to invest in automation, ML and AI to reinforce that operational resilience. Can you share some examples from your perspective, maybe some plans and some potential disconnects? Because you pointed out that it's becoming quite tricky now for banks to balance between information, automation, business resiliency, especially in capital markets.
Yes, Scott, so you made a good start on the context of what probably I'm going to highlight as. And as you also introduced me, I belong to the custody and fund services side of Societe Generale. A large part of this business domain, Carmen, is what you were talking about from a custody perspective, from the fund services perspective as well, because we are involved in the business of valuations of NAVs for collective investment trusts, I would call it. So some of our clients are mutual funds in the form of unitized funds. Some of them are complex hedge funds, private equity businesses, insurance funds, pension funds, so on and so forth. And on the other side, we are also offering them custody services. Now, coming to the context of this discussion, and I liked, Carmen, as you pointed out, first on the business complexity of the work that we are every day challenged with, and then how do we solve using various bouquet of tools and technologies which are available in front of us. Considering operational resiliency, we of course have to keep our lights on day in and day out, but considering also the humongous amount of technical complexities that come in with the solutions in front of us, we also have to continuously think how we evolve the bank to the next level. How do we continuously evolve with the transformation space, bringing in efficiency, making our transactions more straight-through processes, processing oriented. How much do we automate? One of the common challenges which Scott was pointing out, and what I was discussing with a few days back, is often I've seen in my career path of 22 years, or a little more than that, we are hindered with a kind of mindset where we try to go technology first. And that's where, Carmen, I said that I liked it when you talked about the complexity first, and then you brought in the technical landscape of what could be applied to solve those challenges on the process side. Anytime I have seen when we talk about business use cases in the form of AI use case, ML use case. At middle of the journey, there are some challenges because we then try to retrofit the framework that we have created to the actual business problem. And that's really, a wrong way to start. And what I was talking to Scott about the other day is it's always pertinent for me, and I have been able to produce more results, move more processes into production if we just reverse the take of identifying the business problem first, considering the process challenges first, and then move on to find out the right tools and technology which can solve the problem. And that has brought in the maximum amount of operational resiliency in pure form of what we would have been able to take into production than kind of cold storing them and killing them halfway down the line. Now, the approach, what we generally do over the last couple of years, we have realized one thing is from a leadership perspective, if we have two streams, one is the information technology space and the operations and the business resiliency space being led by separate individuals calling their shots at different spaces of transformation with end goals, which of course rightly poised from their own perspective. But the end of a certain duration, we see that the synergies are missing. So we've tried to bring the leadership into one head, and we try to adopt to the transformation processes with ops and IT leadership being led from a strategies perspective, so that one doesn't run 100 meters and the other not running 1,000 meters race. So that is one alignment we have brought in, right? And the other thing we were also discussing about the other day is we have adopted a kind of a process driven approach, which we call as domain driven design. It's an industry reference model as well, but we have adopted to the core. So what we do is we first identify the business outcome, what we are wanting to attain. We don't think technology first. Then over the bottom layer, we lay the processes, right? What are the processes which are involved to be able to derive that business outcome? Then as a third layer, we tie the technologies, the tools, the product, the applications which are sitting on top of the processes which are currently there. So maybe some are legacy, some are more complex, there's some amount of manual interventions in some processes. And after that, we try to identify the problems, what are data related, what are process related, maybe some are pure people related, and some could be technology related. There could be often some use cases to reduce the total cost of ownership. And we then identify what are the tools and technologies which could be used to solve that business problem. And often with this kind of an approach, we have been able to be more successful than go pure technology route. So that is the first point of being process first and then bringing in the right tools and technologies which could solve the problem. And the last point, Scott, is about our processes and the systems are as resilient as I say our people are. So we focus a lot on people development. Home growing the talents, drive transformation is often we find as a best way to be resilient in operations as well than to of course, there is a different thought process where also we often try to partner with those kind of product and technology firms who bring in a lot of business knowledge rather than just frameworks. Often we have failed as well to bring in a framework as a partner, and then they're trying to understand the business failing because we operate in a very, very complex back office domain, and we have to kind of start the wheel all over again. So these are the key things which we try to adopt as much as possible to keep our operations as resilient as possible. Scott, handing it over to you.
Thank you very much, Prasoona. It's definitely complex. And the thing is, you've thought it all through, and you explained to me that the people are a very important part, and the process is more important than the technology. Then you choose the technology to fit. Thank you for that. As we move on to Craig, the other panelists have talked about financial institutions, how they handle this process of identification and mapping. Anything you'd like to add? And then after that, let's move on to another topic about assessments and testing. And as a long-term expert in this field, in the payments world, what should financial institutions be particularly focused about when they're testing their business service tolerance? Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think, I'm obviously going to lean into the same complexity theme that everybody else has touched on. I mean, we're continuing to create modern applications. We're continuing to grow the footprint of the applications that are available and interfaces that we're creating with customers and partners. And so that's, leading to increased complexity throughout the infrastructure. So discovering all of the pieces that are out there, being able to connect and map all of the different components that deliver an application and understand, what are the upstream and downstream implications of, a piece breaking or a piece going out becomes incredibly important. And that's certainly a role where artificial intelligence and machine learning can help with assessing, how all of those different configuration items that you have and systems and applications running out there are interacting with each other on a hour by hour, day by day basis. And so a big part for organizations, and certainly with the work that we're doing at Payments Canada, is making sure that we have deep documentation around the non-functional requirements of our application delivery and the way that applications are being delivered, and looking at the resiliency factors, the redundancy factors throughout the infrastructure, and making sure that we test all of them. So go through and break things to understand that is something failing cleanly? Does it fail automatically? Does it require some sort of human intervention in order to keep the system going? If you're running something that's in an active and you're basically splitting your load 50-50, if one piece goes out, do you know that 100% of the load can go through the one side while you bring the other piece back into play? And so that's sort of one of the areas that we focus on in delivering our platforms.
Thanks, Craig. And on that note of preparation and planning, we'd like to move to our audience poll, our first one, which is, it'll come up on your screen. There you go. With operational resilience becoming a higher priority, what stage are you at in your journey, audience member, in building operational resilience or resiliency? And the poll questions are up on your screen. We'll leave them up there for a while. Please vote, and then we'll be discussing it shortly. Now, Greg, while we're waiting the poll results, I'm going to put the same question to you. From your perspective, what are the critical things involved in assessments and testing procedures that determine operational resilience for an institution, and how can these drive certain business cases? Or for building more robust systems, are there strong examples you can share that would mean, or that would incentivize an organization to really invest here?
Yeah, I think the biggest area that I see a lot of our customers invest in is around automation. And I think automation is key to helping drive the assessment and testing procedures, be it through, beginning with configuration automation, be able to report back to auditors in this space around this area, but more importantly, leveraging automation as part of your processes. I think that enables you to put in a governance framework from an operations standpoint that your lines of business can then adopt and leverage to help implore and help put together those strong governance models that you'll need to enforce the operational requirements like Carmen talked about, right? I mean, as you go through payment processing across the globe and have all these various regulations based, if you're a global company, of course, each area that you might be interfacing with might have different regulations that you need to enact and enforce, right? Data operations has become a key component to that, managing data, managing, understanding your workloads, how those are interdependent across each other, and the various regulations and requirements that those happen, right? The easiest way to do that versus going out and having each group try to define it themselves is to have a strong governance model in place. And that requires to have not only that identification piece in it for visibility, but also that automation component. I think automation is key in the standard that I see that's most employed by operations teams at this point, as that first layer, right? If they can start automating things and collecting it, then they can start driving the insights, right? Prasan had a great approach into identify the business outcomes you need, right? And then start assessing back from there into to enable those business outcomes. What are the processes that I need? And finally, the technologies, right? And if you have that framework in place that can help support that, drive it with automation, you're going to get the results that you're striving for.
Thank you. And again, a very thorough outline of the processes involved. And Carmen, any thoughts you'd like to share on what he's just talked about? And then let's go ahead and display the results of our poll when we get a second. First of all, Carmen, anything to add to what Greg has, and then let's take a look at the results when they come up when that happens.
Sure. So I think both Prasun, right, and Craig mentioned in terms of looking, what are we trying to solve, right? What are the pain points, either client pain points or internal, right, pain points that we are solving in order to analyze what is the best, right, technology, or perhaps the best complex of technologies, ecosystem of technologies we want to put forth, right, to address it. So, for example, in the payment space, obviously fraud, right? It's an issue. It's an issue for our customers, right? Because obviously of the losses, right? The material losses that it can bring. It's an issue for us because obviously the more sophisticated and more advanced models, right, and rules one's operations team deploys, the impact on the client experience, right, can be damaging. So, for example, more payments, right, could be stopped if a particular rule, right, over, let's say, a particular limit payments to a particular corridor or beneficiary and so on are being implemented. So the payments get stopped to be actioned in a particular way, initially manually, right? And then perhaps deploying the technologies in an automated fashion. Then you deal with issues around internally the operations team, right? That again needs to deploy resources as these new models, right, are being implemented in order to deal with those initial phases of the manual intervention. And I think we are going, as my colleague said, through reiteration, right, of these models internally with our external partners in order to learn, right, how we can ensure a seamless client experience, meaning the payments are not stopped maybe more than a few seconds, even when a more complex, right, fraud-related model or outlier-related model is being deployed. And then internally working with our operations colleagues, working with our risk management, with our sanctions and so on colleagues to ensure that the teams are in place to deal with the first wave manually, and then working with them and our partners, right, to automate the process so that in the future we have integration via APIs, we have automation via the machine learning, so that we learn, right, from the past payments that are being stopped for fraud, and we include that in our models so that number of transactions being stopped decreases over time. So it's an iteration process, right? But again, all the technologies we are deploying with the goal in mind of addressing a tangible, right, client and internal issues such as fraud.
Right. So it's continuous learning. It's continuous learning of a system. You set the system up the way it needs to be, and then you make sure you learn from situations that arise. And before you go, we've got our poll results up here. It looks like the largest choice was we have started and things are going well with our journey towards operational resiliency. A small percentage have said we haven't started, actually significant, 16.7%, and then some have had stumbling blocks. So out of all of these, we've probably got 25% that say we've started or just started, need help, or that we've actually got some challenges we've got going, and then the other ones are going well. So any thoughts on that before we move on? Carmen, you have any thoughts on that in particular?
I wanted to actually was thinking to address one of the questions we got from Stefan, right, around DORA, but more, I think, around the EU, right, being proactive, more proactive than North America. So, Stefan, I think you are absolutely right. I think, at least in the Treasury space, we are seeing, more advanced or, a little bit more coordinated responses, and we are seeing those interestingly driven by regulators, while in general in the US those seems to be more market driven. So perhaps those are lagging a little bit, right, because we want to see the business cases, we want to make sure that we talk with lots of clients, right, when we are developing those solutions. So in general, in the Treasury space, you're spot on. EU seems to be a little bit more proactive than in the US, which is good in a way, right? Because we are learning from what we are deploying in that particular region and then taking it to the other regions of the world. In terms of the results of the poll, I don't think there is, I'm not seeing any surprises. I think, right, it seems most organizations have started. looking into the machine learning, into the automation. Obviously, we are right in the financial services space, are dealing with the same pain points, right, around regulatory, around operational costs, and so on. And again, not surprising that have organizations are either have deployed, I think, 8% and happy with the outcome, versus the ones 33% who started things and they're going well. We are at the same place. I think we are in the midst of modernizing systems and linkages and running the resilience scenarios. So I would say, again, no surprises there in the results.
Good. We can't stand surprises. There's enough going on here, right, without it. Pursoon, what do you find interesting about the audience poll, if anything? And also share more some of your views on the right ways and maybe the not so right ways or wrong ways that financial institutions should evaluate and test their procedures for operational resilience. Maybe what's not as resilient as it needs to be.
I would place myself as a use case on this question and try to respond. I wouldn't belong to transformation or any change having completed full and full. I would rather, want people who have responded that they're complete and over with the transformation and they're quite happy with it. With the element of curiosity as, what kind of digitization is still probably waiting for us to see as we have moved from bank 3.0 to bank 5.0 that we call today, and then probably a lot of change that is still awaiting. We have still, I would assume that we have hit the tip of the iceberg when we talk about either the APIs helping open banking to a large way, ML helping back offices to a large way, being able to move to cloud or not being able to move to cloud. There's a lot yet to happen. If we talk about open banking, it has mainly hit the retail banking space, consumer banking space, in the payment services. There's a lot of open banking still to hit on the consumer banking, right? On the complex parts of wholesale banking, where we're dealing with many of the back office functions where the data is lying and waiting to be opened up for probably the partner entities who could consume them better, or the legacy banks, they consume them better, right? So that's a challenge that the wholesale banking is also going to face very soon, like what the retail banking and the consumer banking has faced in the payment services. But that is at the outer layer of what my response is towards the question here. I would rather peg myself in that way. We are trying, we are somewhere there, but there's a lot to achieve still on transformation. One thing, since the talk spoke about investment as part of introducing this question to us, how banks we are poised to invest more and where we are in terms of realizing benefits from that investment. There's a thought that I would rather try to engage all panelists as well to feel the pulse of what you think. In the process of doing transformation, we have often felt that when we evaluate the results from transformation, we take a very myopic view. We try to see how much of results or how much of returns from those investments are outlined to be in the current financial year. And at many times, innovation gets killed, right? And when I say that we have reached to a certain stage of transformation, I think a large part of the attribution when we talk about the non-success areas has been in those kind of use cases which have got cold stored just for the want of right here. And textbooks and theories have all taught us innovation doesn't get written off in the P&L in the first financial year. You amortize it over a long period. But often as leaders, we forget that. We question our systems, we question our people, as are we getting the returns right then in the first financial year, and then the use case for transformation, would it be viable or not? So there's a mindset change that we have to adopt if we have to evolve towards innovation, more radically different ways of doing things, or not getting siloed in what we are doing, how we are doing it in the current ways. We have to adopt to a long-term approach where we talk about innovation yielding results in the future years, making such reusable components which are scalable to give more benefits in the future financial years as well, and not limited by thought of just trying to generate returns in the first financial year. So that's something which is a leadership angle which we have to adopt largely. Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Pursoon. And ROI isn't going to be today on any kind of innovation and really the kind of planning we're talking about for operational resilience. It's not going to happen overnight. It needs to be a long-term focus. Thanks for sharing that. Craig, what do you feel about the poll results? Do they reflect your understanding at Payments Canada? Any variances from your expectations? And What else is it important that we mention here?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously good to see that 50% or more at least have like a good understanding and a good stake into the operational resilience game. I've been rifling through my 35 years experience in this industry to understand when and where I may have worked on a system or a platform that nobody cared if it went down, to try to correlate to the third of the respondents that said that it doesn't apply to them. So that's where I was struggling a little bit.
I'll jump in. I think it might be they're not financial institutions, so perhaps that's what they're talking about. That would be my guess.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I didn't prioritize being in the financial institution space for that question, but yeah, that's a possibility. So I think again, it speaks to the fact that we're continuing to increase the complexity and the footprint of applications and application design. Especially as we move into more distributed systems, into more cloud-based systems, it's allowing us to architect sort of higher resiliency applications. And the thing is that it continues to exponentially increase the complexity of those systems. So, moving to the cloud reduces some complexity that we take away, a lot of the detail of what's happening in the infrastructure layers. So we don't worry about the switches and the storage and all those other pieces, but we're still running virtual machines with operating systems, with, containerization and applications, and still continuing to build resiliency in those layers. And that is just, adding to the volume of things that we need to manage, monitor, and operate on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thanks, Craig. And Greg, going to you, any comments to add to the other panelists, and maybe start bringing in AI and machine learning from your perspective and how they can help reduce a financial institution's vulnerability to infrastructure breakdowns, external attacks, cyber threats, and then feel free to comment on your thoughts on what the other panelists have said or the poll.
Yeah, I think first, I think Stefan Barry's question was great around DORA. It's actually one of the primary factors around where BMC's focus is around operational resiliency and how we can help our customers, right? At the end of the day, we have, as a vendor, we have to come and bring a solution to our customers to help them solve a business problem that they have. And I do think Europe is ahead of the game on this, just like they were with GDPR, right? And then you see California come out with their data protection and other states, and eventually it's going to come down as a federal mandate within the US. Same thing with this, right? I mean, this is going to transform into, or this is going to transition into some kind of US regulations around, again, digital operational resiliency. As banks become more digital, right, how do you ensure and how do you provide the protections to the consumers that they don't know about, right? I mean, it's a very complex world around how all of this works. You talked about it, Craig and Prasoon and Carmen, but it's critical to securing the financial assets as well as the financial security of just the banking system and federal systems in general. I think open banking is transformational. You talked about that, Prasoon, around how that's really affected retail banking. You see the Federal Reserve coming out with their new digital platform that is going to enable some of the back-end processing for the traditional model, right? Instead of having to wait 76 hours for funds to clear, you can get stuff cleared instantly, right? And that's going to transform that age of it. But then again, how do you regulate that, right? And I think that'll come back into those, whatever North America is going to put forward around DORA to help put that framework in place. And I think, those operational resiliency requirements are going to continue to get more complicated. Craig talked about going to the cloud, and that just makes things, it's not that, you talk about, we don't worry about switches or storage from infrastructure standpoint, from an operations, as a former application developer and an agile evangelist, that responsibility now gets transitioned to the developers, right? They're the ones that are now setting up the policies, the governance models to secure those infrastructure assets within the cloud-based services that you are using, right? And so how do you put frameworks in place? How do organizations adopt frameworks that can help govern that? All right, goes back to that governance automation standpoint to help drive that. This is where AI and ML comes in, right? We talked about automation, and I think where you bring in the artificial intelligence and the machine learning for cybersecurity is critical, right? I think Carmen talked about it earlier around digital fraud detection and being able to identify, fraudulent payments and how that fits into the business. And that's driving the lines of business. From an operations standpoint, I see a tremendous amount of ML built into and AI built into cybersecurity threats and identifying unnatural behaviors, things that you don't see, whether it be a denial of service attack, fraudulent login attempts, And you can use easily AI and ML within that space to help identify that and bring that out, right? And I think that's core to help driving our operational resilience model, providing that governance, providing that framework that helps make our customers successful.
Thank you. I keep hearing that G word, governance, and how this all has to, somebody has to make sure how this is all going to tie together once that's figured out, and continues to do so. Carmen, you gave some nice opinions on the polls, and we're going to put up our second poll here in a moment here. But talk a little about the weak points that machine learning and AI can't actually fill in with a typical financial institution. How the process might work with some of these tools, maybe the nuts and bolts, and how they're more robust than simply having human beings watching over, but still a part.
No, absolutely. Exactly like I think we just heard, right, from Greg. It needs to be a continuous, right, kind of like, if you want, governance, right, supervision, right, of all these models by human beings, right, and learning, right, as we go along. So in terms of where we could think about, right, deploying machine learning, I think the way I like to look, it's kind of like for the processes end to end. So for example, from a payments, right, coming back to my world, looking end to end to a payment as well as a client life cycle. So for a payment, right, very simply, right, thinking how we as consumers, right, or businesses, right, governments and so on, make payments, right, you have to provide some information, right? In some instances, you might have the information available. Sometimes you don't, and you need to go and collect it, right, before even you think about launching a payment around the beneficiary, right? Maybe you're not sure about their account. You're not sure in what currency that account is. You have perhaps no idea how your financial institution is going to make the payment. Do they need a routing number? If the payment is cross-border, do you have an idea, or do they have an idea what the routing number for a particular local real-time payments or ACH, right, would look like to provide it? So how can we deploy machine learning in that space, right? Creating these tables where we have the information, right, real time, being able to ping it, and then allow the party who wants to initiate that particular transaction to leverage the information. So that's one piece, again, before even, right, the payment it's started, where machine learning can definitely be one of our friends. As we look into the processing, I think we delve a little bit into the example, obviously from an operational perspective, all the repairs, right, and learning from the past repairs and making sure that payments are not being stopped, right, for reasons that perhaps they were being stopped in the morning, right, and those models will help us automate that processing. To the fraud example, I think that Scott and I delved into, where machine learning helps you identify cases and outliers, where you can work with your customer as an intermediary, for example, in our role, to advise and make sure that the payments that shouldn't go through are being stopped. And then post-processing, and just to take an example, there are so many even there, right? But post-processing, we are dealing with large number of inquiries, investigations on behalf of our clients, on behalf of other banks, on behalf of our, perhaps, right, working with fintechs to solve those. How can we deploy machine learning in the context of those investigations, especially more complex ones, so that we improve the client experience, so that we reduce the time that takes to address the more complex investigations, so that we reduce the costs and the pressure on our operations team, right, to devote to that particular space, so that we can use the data that's being derived from these investigations and, provide complete reporting and a complete view and analytics to our clients, so they know how we are dealing at a particular moment in time with their investigations, how we are improving those rates. I think similar to what Prasoon was mentioning around the STP, right, during the processing, similar in the servicing space. how are we improving that particular area of business. So again, looking at end-to-end at that particular transaction, be that a payment, be that a loan, be that right of any other service, right, that we are providing to customer, as well as the customer life cycle, right, from onboarding right to the servicing piece, and seeing what are the pain points and where, right, this technology together with the others that everyone has mentioned are gonna give us the tools to address that pain point.
Thank you, Carmen. So they're tools, they have to be used appropriately, and there obviously going to be some new areas of application, but right now it's being used quite a bit. And it's actually interesting to hear how much this has changed even over the last few years. Our audience question is, in what areas do you feel you need the most support and help from your service providers? Please vote if you haven't already. We'll leave it up there for a few moments, but we're going to move into Prasoon. Before we get the results, what about that data, Prasoon? Talk a little about data. There's a lot of data throughout financial institutions. Talk about where AI and ML can help, and how does it speed up analysis or choosing which pathways to go for that FI, and how do you make sure you have all the data you need to get done what you need to get done for operational resilience?
Sure, Scott. And first, let me outline of the move to production using AI, ML, smart automation, or in some cases, it's not AI, ML in isolation, but combination of robotics plus ML put together when we have had to automate the complete flows of operations. So one interesting area is the reconciliation area. There's a lot of manual intervention across banks, and I've experienced there are humongous number of people across multiple functions, back office functions within banks, who are involved in doing reconciliations. And reconciliations primarily originate, we all understand, because data across two streams of upstream systems which ought to be same, but they come as not similar, and therefore the need of reconciliation is there in some parts of. And often the results are attributed, often the causes of breaks are attributed to unclean data quality. But in many cases, our businesses are modeled in a way where reconciliation is something that is binding on us, which is regulatory, and we don't. It is not related. It's more to do with once the breaks are identified, how do we investigate the breaks, find out the causes, the reasons of the break, and breaks. It's a very interesting space of application of ML, where banks are sitting on a humongous number of years of data, how a man investigated, analyzed, and fixed. So this is what we are feeding for the machines to learn, algorithm or any kind of other algorithm, depending on the type and nature of the use case. But we are feeding this data, which is largely structured in our databases, lying, and training and testing the models to move into production. And today, I'm happy to say that as part of the bank, we have been able to move to production a large number of process flows, which are now analyzed and investigated by machines rather than human beings. The other area where we have been successful in doing, I would say partially successful, not as much, is what Greg was mentioning about in trying to predict outages, trying to predict vulnerabilities within the system, rather than waiting for the vulnerability to strike, waiting for the outage to happen. Here we have been partially successful because it largely depends on the erstwhile information of how previous outages and previous vulnerabilities have been fixed. Is that information there in the system which can be used for the machines to learn? What we have experienced is, I think it's the same across banks, because this is not the first time I'm experiencing. The previous information of how these incidents were fixed, how these vulnerabilities were fixed, are not so much structured and lying within our databases, which can be used for training our models. Trying to inculcate this culture, educate our people when they work on incident management tools, to create a database of knowledge which can, in the future years, maybe 6 months from now, or based on complexity in a year from now or 2 years from now, we can adopt those knowledge to train the machines and give us the right results. So this is one area where I think on a resiliency front, on a vulnerability front, we can use a large part of information base to predict results rather than wait for outages to happen. But I'm also very much cognizant of Carmen when she mentioned about when we talk about automating stuff, right? We have to be also cognizant about exception flows. In many cases, some processes are too complex. If we automate too much and leave the key people who are involved in manually intervening and solving those problems out of the system, we may hit a stage of non-resilient framework. And she was explaining a few cases, but in the current geopolitical situation that most banks are facing today, I'm sure we all have to learn to adopt to the new ways. For example, if we have a Swift for a particular counterparty, then how does the system work if we have completely automated the flow? So if we have automated, then how we deal with those situations. So it's very important to understand that we automate to an extent where it is optimum to be automated, and beyond that is sometimes counterproductive. So from a resiliency perspective, I think we have to keep all these things in mind. And Scott, from your point of view about data, of course, as a bank, we have inorganically grown a lot through acquisitions and mergers. So data is everywhere. Applications are too many. So there's an ongoing challenge of how we can pool the data together, consolidate them to use that raw data, which is kind of meaningless for automation, to convert it into information, and then that information to knowledge. And only then we are able to use that data better, right? And yeah,
Excellent.
so these three probably: storage of data, the inorganically growth, which has resulted in quite sporadic nature of data, to be how we can consolidate and make it more meaningful, is the challenge we are going through, Scott. Thanks.
Absolutely, it's very challenging. And in fact, speaking of challenges, if we could put the results of our poll up there, we're getting close to wrapping up here. And I just wanted to thank you for that, because we continue to ask the question, where can AI and ML fit in? But it always comes back to the people who have to interpret that data, not just where the data is coming from, but when you get it, what you're going to do with it. And in your case, you were talking about the fact that it would have been very helpful to have incident management data properly applied so that you can learn from it going forward. Looking on the screen, what areas do you feel you need the most support and help from your service providers? It looks like we're pretty well split across the map here. But at least the first few categories are identification, mapping, assessment, and testing, understanding, response, and recovery. So that's where people need the most help, pretty much evenly split. Craig, any surprises there before we start wrapping up for the day? Any thoughts you have on this issue of support areas that are needed, key support areas?
Yeah, no, I would, when I put my continuous improvement hat on, I would say, I always go all of the above. For all those areas, they definitely all interplay on each other, organizationally, to bring all that together. And I think, when it comes to leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's about, basically tackling that huge volume of data, whether it's from, the complexity of the systems that are in place, the volume of data that comes from monitoring all of the different components and all the telemetry that's coming in. It takes algorithms to understand, what is the steady state operation look like, and how do you pick up on something that's not quite looking correct, right? Like what's not working somewhere in the system? Is something slowing down? Is something breaking? Other pieces that are going awry. And I think that type of modeling, if you get your handle around that modeling just within the internal operations and resiliency of the application itself, a lot of those same models can be applied from the cyber threat and security perspective, looking at the traffic and the interactions that are going on from the outside into your application, to understand when, be able to pick out when a user or a system is starting to interact with your platform in a way that it's not supposed to be, or it doesn't usually do it, to be able to pick those things out quickly. It takes a lot of power to be able to pick those things out of the streams that are going on.
Yes, that was one of the audience questions, was how can you use this technology to conduct scenario testing, test various impact tolerances and so forth. And I think you answered that very well. Thank you. There's a lot of applications, clearly. We're getting close to wrap up here. I'd like to get some final thoughts, just your key takeaways. What is one truly central best practice? Just take a minute and a half, if you wouldn't mind, to keep it short, on what you feel. Prasoon, we'll start with you. What's most important here?
I think refer to this as part of the first question I answered. No matter what we do, people are our biggest strength, Scott. So if there's one thing that I would like to focus in my organization amongst my people, is how we can home grow talent, partner to an extent where we don't repeatedly reinvent the wheels ourselves. but partner with the right technology firms outside to be able to reuse some of the frameworks outside. But when it comes to adopting those frameworks within the bank, we sit on a lot of complex businesses where we have to focus on people, grow people, bank on their knowledge. So as much as possible, being able to build those skills in-house is key to any kind of transformation. So that's something that I would like to go with.
Thank you. So talent, Craig, back to you. Key focus, key area that you think banks should focus on.
Yeah, I think my best practice is always to double check everything. Tools are great, but it's usually people implementing those tools, and so always make sure that you've got the coverage, the depth, and everything with the tools that are interacting in your environment, and just double check.
Awesome. Double check. Carmen.
I'll
Operational resilience. What's most important?
I'll marry the two concepts that both Prasoon and Craig just mentioned, which is the talent. I would extend that beyond the firms, one's talent, but to the industry, right? Because some of these processes, especially as we are thinking about utilities and so on, right, will probably be built through the creativity, putting together of people from various firms, including the regulators, including right partners such as SWIFT, fintechs, and so on. So coming together and being creative and kind of like unleashing the talent in the industry will help us solve some issues that the industry is dealing with. And then, and I would say from a governance perspective, exactly like Craig said, I think we need, as we are being creative, right, to make sure that we are documenting, that we are keeping an eye and kind of like deciding where, right, it makes sense to deploy and where it makes sense to think creative about other ways.
So does talent and decisions. And Greg, you've got the final word here. Your thoughts on the most important, perhaps best practice to attain and retain operational resilience for a financial institution.
Thanks, Scott. I believe it's around accepting digital transformation. I think I see that within all of our organizations around, especially in the operations world, as they support their lines of business. And Prasoon talked about it around how do you measure the ROI around digital transformation? And it's not just a computation around cost, it's around accepting risk, right? And how do you adjust to the risk demands that are going to be impacting your business? And the primary focus around that moves when you accept that it's a transformation. It's not just technology. More importantly, it's around the processes and the people that you just talked about and bringing that all together to help drive that transformation for your organization. And so to me, that's the biggest thing that organizations can take from this. This isn't going to be a little change. This is going to be a transformation, and accepting and embracing that to become a new business model.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think if it hasn't become, if it wasn't clear before, it's clear now. It's not just about the processes, it's about the people, making the right decisions to deploy in your organization. AI, ML, automation, it's all going to be driven by what's best for your organization, and then you can attain and hopefully keep that operational resilience. I want to thank everyone for joining us in the audience. I want to thank you for your participation in the polls. Again, Greg Bukowski of BMC, Prasoon Mukherjee of Societe Generale, Carmen Pogursky of Bank of New York Mellon, and Craig Borisovich of Payments Canada. Thanks to all of you. You can access this via recording later. And as of now, I'll just say, hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks for joining us here at Finextra. Have a great day.